This is the story of Rapunzel and Flynn's royal wedding. You can read along with me in your book. You'll know it's time to turn the page when you hear this sound. Let's begin now. Rapunzel was a long-lost princess who had recently returned to her kingdom. And in discovering who she was, she'd met and fallen in love with a former thief named Flynn Rider. After many adventures, Rapunzel and Flynn's wedding day arrived. It was the biggest celebration in the history of the kingdom. Rapunzel always remembered it as a magical day.
Everything was perfect, just like I always dreamed it would be.
Flynn did have one complaint later, though. His portrait in the royal tapestry.
They still can't get my nose right.
Rapunzel reminded him of the wedding.
It was a magical day, and everything went just as we planned.
But Flynn knew that wasn't quite right.
Well, almost.
The day began when Flynn saw Rapunzel walk down the aisle. The whole church turned to admire the princess in her beautiful white dress and long, long veil. Rapunzel was by far the loveliest bride the priest had ever seen.
Wow.
She looked so beautiful that Flynn's heart skipped a beat. He was dazzled.
Wow.
The royal chapel looked beautiful. Every inch was filled with flowers. Rapunzel's parents, the king and queen, wanted everything to be perfect for their precious daughter's wedding. When at last Rapunzel reached the altar, the ceremony began.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the joining of
Pascal the chameleon and Maximus the royal guard horse stood at attention by their sides. As ring bearers, they shared a most important job. They smiled as they watched their friends beginning a new chapter in their lives. And then, all of a sudden, a flower drifted down and landed on Max's nose. The flower tickled Max. He tried to ignore it, but he just couldn't. A sneeze was coming. He did his best to stop it, but it was no use. As Max sneezed, the royal wedding rings sailed across the room and out the door. Max imagined the priest asking for them later in the ceremony.
May I have the rings?
Rapunzel and Flynn would be shocked. The whole castle would erupt in a panic.
The kingdom is lost!
And the queen would be beside herself. First, she'd cry out,
"Those were my grandmother's wedding rings!"
And then, who knows? The wedding might have to be called off. Only Max and Pascal had seen the rings fly away. The priest continued the ceremony.
And the mutual respect which they bring to their life together.
Max and Pascal looked between the happy couple and the church door as the priest spoke.
The union of two people.
Then they raced after the rings. The rings rolled onto a patio and over a wall, down to the courtyard far below. Max and Pascal knew they had no choice. They jumped over the wall after the rings. In the courtyard, hundreds of cooks and servers were putting the finishing touches on the food for the wedding banquet. The rings went two ways, so Max and Pascal split up. One ring bounced from table to table, landing in a bowl of tomato soup. Pascal dove in after it and got it. But when he popped out of the bowl, he nearly gave a server a heart attack. He dropped the ring, and way it bounced. It again went from table to table, finally landing on one. Pascal stuck out his tongue to get it, and it stuck to an ice sculpture on the table. As the shocked chameleon yanked his tongue back, the ring went flying. In the confusion, one of the servers bumped into the table and knocked the ice sculpture into the air. Meanwhile, Max was chasing after the other ring, which was bouncing along the street. He ran so fast that he ran into the hair and makeup carts and ended up wearing a pink dress, a hat, and makeup. At last, the ring rolled to a stop under a cart. Max almost had it. But just then, the ice sculpture landed on the other end of a cart. Max was catapulted into the air. In the church, the priest continued the ceremony.
Held in reverence, dignity, honor, respect.
Just as he said that, Max flew by the church window. Luckily, everyone inside was paying attention to the ceremony, so no one noticed. Max landed in the royal wedding carriage, which was waiting to take Rapunzel and Flynn away. With all the commotion, the ring had started rolling again. Max chased after it in the carriage. The ring Pascal was chasing bounced down a sidewalk and into a paper lantern a little girl was holding. Shocked, she let it go. It began to float toward a net that royal helpers were holding. The net covered a bunch of floating lanterns that were to be released as soon as Rapunzel and Flynn were married. Max was able to get a hold of his ring. Along the streets, merchants selling royal wedding souvenirs were lined up. They held out pans with a picture of Rapunzel and Flynn.
Frying pans, commemorative frying pans here.
The royal carriage was rolling so quickly that because Max's head was sticking out, it banged into one pan after the next. And with a loud crash, he hit the frying pan warehouse sign. The crash sounded like a gong. Royal dovekeepers heard it. They hadn't been expecting their cues so soon, but they went to their stations at once.
That's the signal. Release the doves.
As soon as the sky filled with doves, another group of royal workers looked up.
There's the doves. Release the lanterns.
The doves were their signal to start the next phase of the celebration. Meanwhile, Pascal's lantern had gotten caught in the net, and he was able to climb on it and get his ring. But his lantern was floating, and by then, he was too high up to jump to the ground. Having been hit in the head so many times, Max felt dazed. His carriage banged into a wall at the edge of a large hill. Max went flying into the air again and landed on the street. A flower cart broke his fall. Up above, one of the doves twirled Pascal's lantern around and around. The chameleon got dizzy and let go of the ring. It pinged from one place to another until it landed on a hook holding a bunch of hanging barrels. They crashed down onto a mountain of wine barrels that had been stacked for the celebration. The wine barrels cracked open, and a huge flood of wine gushed down the street. Max ran away and rescued Pascal, whose lantern had landed nearby. Everyone else ran too. Max and Pascal came to a dead end. But Max grabbed onto a line of flags from overhead and swung up and away from the flood. In the air, Pascal spotted a dove with the ring and stuck out his tongue. He caught the ring. Max and Pascal Finally, both had their rings, but they still had not finished crashing into things. They didn't land on a flower cart or in a carriage, though. They fell through the roof of the tar works. Now they were covered in muck. The rings were safe, and that was all that mattered. Max and Pascal raced back to the chapel, covered with tar and food, and wearing strange clothes. Luckily, the priest was just getting to the ring part.
In everlasting peace. May I have the rings?
Breathless, Max and Pascal held the rings up for the priest to give to Rapunzel and Flynn. Rapunzel and Flynn had been gazing happily into each other's eyes. But as they looked at Max and Pascal, Rapunzel gasped. Flynn's jaw dropped open. Everyone in the church stared at the ring bearers. They couldn't imagine what had happened. Stunned and distracted, the priest finished the ceremony.
I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss.
And so Rapunzel and Flynn did, and the church instantly filled with cheers. Then it was time for the reception, and time for Max and Pascal to relax at last. That is, until Max decided to rest his hoof on the cart that held the royal wedding cake. Before he knew it, the cart began to roll away. Flynn hadn't noticed. He spoke to the crowd.
So, who wants a piece of cake?
Little did he know that Max and Pascal were about to have another adventure.